Last year, it was a safety car during the first cycle of pit stops that ruined the chances for Sergio Perez to win the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This year, there was a safety car during the pit cycle, but Perez actually took advantage of it this time. It wasn't during his pit stop, and he was able to hold on and win the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. 2 straight pole positions for him at this track, and he is an absolute beast on these street circuits. I mean, seriously, all of his wins at Red Bull have been on street circuits. 2021, he won at Azerbaijan. Last year, he won at Monaco and Singapore. And this year, to start off the year, he wins at Saudi Arabia. I don't know what it is about Checo and these street courses, but he's got them figured out, it's safe to say. Only the second race of the season, of course, but he is tied in terms of the most wins this season. And he's only, I think, a point behind Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. Of course, last week they finished 1-2 with Verstappen winning, Perez second, but neither of them got the fastest lap. This week it was Perez first, Verstappen second, and Verstappen got that fastest lap. Speaking of Max Verstappen, had some drive shaft issues during qualifying, so he had to start 15th. Right at the beginning of Q2, just was stuck in third gear. They had to go back to the garage. We're not able to get back out in time. We're able to fix the problem for the race. He was up to about 8th, maybe 7th. And then, the pit stop started and he was up to 4th or 5th. And that's when the safety car happened, which I would say is a questionable safety car, first of all. Lance Stroll did a really good job of pulling his car off the track once he realized there was an issue and that he needed to retire the car. He kind of got behind the wall where he was parking the car. And they did a full course safety car, I think because they said the GPS was showing that the car was on the track. I don't know how you don't have eyes right there at that turn to tell them, no, there's not a car in the middle of the racing surface. There's no need to do a full safety car. I think that was a virtual safety car at most. I think a safety car was too much. And, it did essentially play a factor into the results of the race. Verstappen, I'm not saying he would not have finished second. He very well could have just blasted through the field on a virtual safety car on new tires, but it would have been much more difficult for him to get to second because after the safety car, everyone had pitted. Alonso had to serve his 5-second penalty for the improper start. By the way, he had a terrific start, but it was improper because he was outside the box. But Verstappen was up to 5th or 4th during that safety car, so he was able to gain a lot of time and a lot of advantage on some of the other cars. He never had to pass the Ferraris, and he was 4th because he only had to pass Russell and Alonso. Russell actually did a pretty good job holding him up a bit. It took 6 or so laps, maybe a little bit less. Let's call it 4 or 5 just to be safe. But of course, no DRS for those first 2. Verstappen had the straight line speed advantage, but wanted to be patient with it, didn't want to make an over-aggressive move when he knew he needed the points and all that stuff. And once he got the DRS, blasted by George Russell, and then was able to catch up to Fernando Alonso, past Fernando Alonso. And Perez was actually holding well for a while there. I think when Verstappen passed Alonso, it was about 5.8 seconds to Perez, and it took him 15 or so laps to get it under 5 seconds, I want to say. It took him a long time to get it under 5 seconds. He got it down to 4.2 at one point. He put together a few really quick laps, and it seemed like he was finally closing in. Then he started to report that he was hearing some weird sounds, and the drive shaft felt weird again, and he wasn't sure. He felt like something was wrong, and the team was telling him there was nothing wrong, and he kind of lost some of that time back, so he never got within 4 seconds of Perez. The closest he got was 4.2. I thought after that safety car, when Verstappen was P4, Perez P1, and Alonso, Russell 2 and 3, I thought Verstappen had this race won. He's in the fastest car. He's been the best driver the past couple of years. He's got 2 world championships. Perez is a really good driver, don't get me wrong, but you're going up against your world champion teammate. It's going to be tough to beat him. But Perez did a really good job. He didn't have to face him wheel to wheel or anything. He didn't have to, fight him off with DRS or anything. He maintained the gap, essentially. Sure, he lost about a second, maybe a second and a half there. But by the end of the race, he was pulling away. When Verstappen started to have some of these more issues or what he thought were issues, it was up to 7 seconds entering the final lap. But then Verstappen, of course, everything was fine on the final lap, and Verstappen got the fastest lap to maintain the championship lead. But yeah, very impressive performance by Perez. Once again, these street circuits just suit his style. I don't know why, but he's great at them. And as for the non-Red Bulls, Fernando Alonso got his 100th career podium today. Okay, never mind. Fernando Alonso didn't finish on the podium. Apparently, he had an improper serving penalty or something, so he didn't serve it properly. Kind of like Ocon last week. Remember when Ocon had like 50 penalties last week? Well, Alonso had an improper start, and then they didn't serve the penalty right. It's a 10-second penalty. Russell finishes on the podium. Alonso finishes fourth, I believe. Fourth, I want to say. Maybe fifth behind Hamilton. I want to say fourth. I think fourth. But he got a 10-second penalty for that. So everything I say coming up about a Fernando Alonso podium, just ignore it. You can skip through it. Just skip through it. It's a lot of podiums. I think Lewis Hamilton has 191. But Alonso to get his 100th podium, and he's 2 for 2 at Aston Martin. Remember last summer, I think we talked about this in the Bahrain video, but when Fernando Alonso decided to announce that he was moving from Alpine to Aston Martin, a lot of people questioned it. Alpine was currently fourth in the constructors, or they were fighting for fourth in the constructors. Aston Martin was struggling a lot. They were sixth or seventh, maybe even worse at the time. Just no speed in the car, but Alonso looked at the long-term plan, probably had a meeting, and Lawrence Stroll told him all about it, and it has paid off. 2 podiums in 2 races, as where he only had 1 podium in his 2 years at Alpine. So very strong start for Aston Martin, very strong start for Fernando Alonso. His teammate Lance Stroll was running up in the top 5 before his mechanical failure. So overall, great performance for Aston Martin outside, of course, of the mechanical failure. But yes, outside of that safety car for Lance Stroll, not really an eventful race. This race, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, in its first 2 seasons, had very eventful races. In 2021, it was the second to last race, and it was an absolute mess, I guess is the right word. Verstappen and Hamilton running Hamilton off the track, brake checking him, trying to hold him off, penalties everywhere, safety cars, crashes. It was a chaotic race. Last year, there were still a couple safety cars. It was a little bit chaotic, but not as chaotic. But then you had the DRS chicken game where Leclerc and Verstappen were just slamming the brakes, trying to see who could get DRS before the front straight. And it was a little bit chaotic in that sense, but no crashing or anything, or running each other off the track. This year, 1 safety car, and it was for a mechanical failure. No crashes, I don't even remember a spin happening. I think a couple guys ran off track a couple of times, but fairly clean race. But Perez wins. It's his 5th career win, I want to say. Once again, another street course that he has won at. I don't know what it is about these street courses. I'm going to say it again. I don't know why, but he's really good at them. He really is. 4 of his 5 career wins have been on street courses. He is currently 1 point behind in the championship. I know it's only race 2, but it's still fun to think about. Second place, Max Verstappen. Considering he started 15th, I think that's a pretty good result for him. He got kind of lucky with that safety car there in about halfway through the race when Stroll was out, and that really set him up to get second pretty easily. And second place was at worst what he was going to finish once that safety car hit. I think if it stayed green the whole time, he probably would have still finished on the podium. Maybe he would have gotten second, but it's too tough to see. It's just how racing works sometimes. These cautions come out, and sometimes it benefits some. It doesn't benefit others. It benefited him in this case. Third place, Fernando Alonso, his second podium of the season. As we said, career podium number 100. How many teams has he gotten a podium with? Aston, Alpine, Ferrari, McLaren, Renault. Am I missing any? I might be missing some, but he's got podiums for a lot of teams. Here he is, over 40 years old, still getting podiums, still looking really competitive. It's going to be interesting to see when he wins a race this year. That's right, I'm saying when he wins a race this year. Fourth place, George Russell. Considering that Mercedes wrote a letter to their fans saying, sorry, we suck so bad after finishing 5th and 7th. They finished 4th, 5th this week. Interesting. But yeah, they actually did better than expected. They were ahead of Ferrari, which was weird considering how good Ferrari was last year. Or not last year, well, yes, last year, but last week when their cars weren't exploding. And they actually beat Ferrari straight up. They were ahead of them most of the race. So if you're Mercedes, I think you have to be happy with that, the fact that you were ahead of Ferrari. But Right now, the battle for second in the Constructors actually looks kind of wide open between Aston, Mercedes, and Ferrari. If it wasn't for Lance Stroll's mechanical failure, he would have been up there. So it'll be interesting to see how second for the Constructors goes this year. After that, as I said, the other Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. Then you got the Ferraris of Sainz and Leclerc. Ocon finished 8th in the Alpine, and then his teammate Gasly right behind him. So Gasly scored points in his first 2 races for Alpine. 10th place, Kevin Magnussen, some points for Haas, or a point for Haas. Their first point of the season. Good performance for him. Had a good little battle with Yuki Tsunoda there near the end of this race for that final points position. Yuki Tsunoda 11th, Hulkenberg 12th, Zhou Guanyu 13th, Nick DeVries 14th, Oscar Piastri 15th, 16th Logan Sargent, 17th Lando Norris, 18th Valtteri Bottas, and then Albon had brake failure. He said, I have a brake failure, and they showed him in turn 22, I want to say, kind of backing off. Then he passed the pit lane and made another whole lap. I don't know why he didn't just park it then when he knew he had a brake failure. And then last, Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll, unfortunate for him, he was ahead of the Ferraris, right behind the Mercedes of George Russell. He was running up there in, I guess, 4th it was at the time, but he was having a really good race going. Considering that he has 2 hurt wrists, he's really been killing it this year. He's been looking good so far. So if he can keep it up, if he can get fully healthy, could he win this year? That would be quite the story. But yeah, as I said, a pretty uneventful Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. The biggest thing was Verstappen rallying from 15th to 2nd. Perez looking good so far. Can he compete for the championship? Maybe. I don't know. But Alonso, Aston Martin still looking really good. Mercedes maybe taking a step up after week 1. Ferrari is at least both their cars finished this week, I guess. But as for everyone else, it seems like it's going to be interesting to see who finishes in the points. We've had quite a few points finishers already. I'm sure we'll have a lot more. Maybe everyone will score points again this year, just like last year. Thanks for watching. We got a NASCAR race coming up here in, I guess, 15 minutes. So thanks again for watching. Have a great rest of your day, night, morning, wherever you are.